No let-up at all in the fighting in Ukraine, and the propaganda war is also intensifying. A clinic comes under attack. Who's to blame? Residential areas flattened. The same question. Who is to blame? A whole city cut off. Again, who's to blame? It's a battle of words between a man whose country clearly stands behind him and an autocrat with a long record of pulverizing opposition. On To The Point, we are Zelenskyy against Putin. Whose truth is stronger? Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And my guests here in the studio are Natalia Smolentceva, a Russian-born journalist now with Deutsche Welle here in Germany. Also with us is Sudha David-Wilp from the German Marshall Fund. And a warm welcome too to Moritz, Gathmann, chief reporter with the German magazine Cicero. Thank you, all three, for being with us here today. And on this show today, we wanted to look at the power of words and the power of images. And where better to begin than with Natalia? I'd like to ask you, Natalia, to decipher for us some video that a lot of people have been seeing, that has had a lot of influence. Give us your take on what it's all about. Here we go.
So we see this as a live broadcast on Monday night on one of the main Russian state channels, and for a couple of seconds editor Marina Ovsyannikova rushed into the studio behind the presenter holding a sign saying basically no to war and saying don't believe in propaganda, they are lying to you. This was just a short moment. It was cut then in the live TV, but it spread immediately on social media.
It had a huge impact.
Exactly. It was discussed both in Russia and outside of Russia. Mm-hmm. Well, we have to know that some social media is already restricted in Russia, so I guess not a lot of people have seen it, or not everyone has seen it. But among those who've seen it, it was, debated whether it was real or fake, and whether it's a heroic act or is it just the way for her to...
And what's your take on it? Was it real? Was it fake?
It was real, and now we know, because we know this person, and she's been already... she had a court hearing already. She was already given, a fine for this action. So we do know it's real, and we do know that... why she did it. She also released a video saying that her personal story, this is very important for her. Her father is Ukrainian, her mother is Russian, despite the fact that she's been working for Russian state TV, Russian propaganda essentially for past years. This is the red line she couldn't cross, basically.
It's really powerful stuff, yeah. Moritz, could you tell us, we're going to bring up now a photo image, which I'd like to ask you to tell us what it signifies for you, yeah?
Well, this is a photo from the city Mariupol, which is like 500,000 in Ukraine, and it's a besieged city. And what we see is the impact of a Russian rocket attack on a hospital in Mariupol several days ago, and we see a pregnant woman who was carried away. I even know the photographer. It's Yevgeny Malolietka, a Ukrainian photographer who's in the city until now. And of course, this is a very, very emotional picture. And of course, it totally doesn't fit with the idea that Russia is trying to give of this war. Russia is saying it's a special operation against the Ukrainian military, against some Nazis. And of course, in the moment when they attack hospitals in Ukraine, and this leads to this impact. It's horrifying, and
absolutely,
yeah.
Okay, well, to reiterate what we've seen the images of that dreadful attack on the maternity hospital. A pregnant woman and her baby died when the hospital where she was meant to give birth was attacked. I'd like to ask you, Sudha David-Wilp, what are your thoughts about those two series of images?
Well, there are two images that have certainly struck a chord, both in terms of the bravery of this woman that stood up in the face of great danger, but spoke her mind, because many Russians who don't agree with Putin's actions are leaving the country. So the ones that are staying behind are certainly under risk for speaking out. And as you mentioned, she went through 2 days of, lack of sleep and a probably fear for her life, and is now out. But who knows what, will happen to her next. And the other image also, of course, strikes fears for the civilian population in Ukraine, because this, of course, brings about questions about is this regime in Russia committing war crimes? Because there is a deliberate attack on civilian infrastructure and on hospitals, and the WHO has actually already spoken out against it.
Well, Natalia, what would you say about this? About these discussions now about war crimes and genocide? I mean, you grew up in Russia. That's where you spent most of your life. Tell us how you reflect on that. What you're seeing now.
Well, for me as a Russian, it's really hard to see what Russia, my country, essentially is doing in Ukraine. I've been in Russia just recently, just 2 weeks ago, and this moment when the war started was, I guess one of the worst moments I've experienced, honestly, because until the last moment I couldn't believe this was possible, even when and I think many people in Russia...
I read this, that you had said this, you couldn't believe it. I mean, for me as a little bit of an outsider, we'd seen this symbolic gesture, this huge dramatic theatrical gesture of the convoy moving forward so threateningly.
We've seen this as well, and a lot of people I've been talking in Moscow, like during my reports and just on the daily life, they said, no, it's all staged, it's all the game Putin is playing, he wants to, get something else from the West, he wants to get an agreement, he wants to be recognized as the superpower, but he will never, ever wage a war against Ukraine. This is just insane. And, we all woke up on the morning of 24th and understood that it is insane.
The world had changed. The world had completely changed.
The world has changed, yes.
I mean, one thing that I want to add, I arrived in Ukraine, in the eastern part of Ukraine, the day before the war started, and even there, people didn't want to believe that this kind of war would start, that a large-scale war against the whole country would start. People thought that maybe there would be some escalation at the front line or anything, but they couldn't believe that this would happen, even like right next to these people's republics where people knew what war was like. They didn't want to believe. One thing I wanted to add concerning these pictures, I've lived 5 years in Russia. I have relatives there, I have friends there, and what's really hard for me to understand how Russians, these pictures, they also arrive in Russia, what's happening there. And the houses, the people, the faces, the way people talk, it's very similar to Russian cities. These places, they look like all these houses from Soviet times. They could be in Vladivostok, in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, anywhere. And I can't understand how Russians can accept and can somehow realize that this is happening, that people and places who are very similar to them, they get bombed by their army at the moment.
So, what's your answer to that question? Because I think, we're all thinking about that.
Sure. It's very interesting that you bring that up, because this picture of the woman being carted out of the hospital, the pregnant woman, Russia has said that this is a crisis actor. And if you look to, for example, the United States, you hear fringe voices on the right also talking about, gun violence, school shootings, like what happened in Connecticut to the kindergarten, Sandy Hook, as being, those were all crisis actors. So somehow people are being, brainwashed with disinformation about what the actual state is. As you mentioned before, Putin has prepared the Russian people to think that this is a war, a glorious war of, freeing the Ukrainians from Nazis, right? So he's tried to harken back to a time of Russian patriotism, namely World War II.
OK, before we move on, because it's very interesting, let's just listen to how Vladimir Putin himself explains why he began this awful war. He gave this speech in an address to Ukrainian soldiers. That's important to mention.
Dear comrades, your grandfathers and great-grandfathers did not fight the Nazis and defend our common fatherland so that neo-Nazis could seize power in Ukraine. You made an oath to serve the Ukrainian people. They are a fascist junta who have seized power. They are plundering Ukraine and exploiting its people. Don't fulfill their criminal orders. Lay down your weapons and go home.
Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about language today, and I think it's very important or very interesting there, Moritz, that there's Vladimir Putin who has said, you have been talking about the fact that there is a war being fought, that there is devastation and destruction. Vladimir Putin is telling his people that they may not use the word war to describe what is going on. How shocking is that? What does that tell us?
Well, actually, to be honest, no nation who's starting a war is talking about war, actually. I mean, we know it from Germany, we know it from other countries. People like to, politicians who start a war, they like to talk about special operations, about operations, limited operations, whatever. They're not saying we are going to war, we are waging a war. War is unpopular everywhere. And so Putin is trying to copy Western leaders, maybe, but I think the problem is that nobody is buying this in the country he's attacking. He's talking to the Ukrainian soldiers and to the Ukrainian people and telling them that Russia comes to liberate the country from a Nazi junta. I just want to add that Zelenskyy is a Jew. You know, the president of the country is a Jew.
Very important point, yeah.
It's an important point. And maybe there are lots of Ukrainians who were dissatisfied with the president before this war started. There are several points of critique. Of course, it's no perfect country, it's no perfect democracy, but it's definitely no junta. And people in Ukraine, they didn't want to be liberated. And that's why maybe the only people who are believing this are some alt-right people in the US and some Russians who believe in the state propaganda. But in Ukraine, this didn't work, not at all.
Exactly. I think the question is whether this is actually addressed to the Ukrainian population, and Putin is just so, like Russian leadership is so full that Ukraine is waiting for Russian army to being liberated, or whether this is actually addressed to the Russian population to reinforce this narrative that, you know, what we are doing is not, they're actually saying this, what we are doing is not the war, is the prevention of the war, which is like calling black white and white black, so to say. So in this is also...
That was the point. I mean, you're saying it's standard practice for a country going to war, but I feel as though it is a total abuse of language, an Orwellian abuse of language, that you say that one thing is another thing. You turn it on its head. You make a mockery of language.
But I think that Putin believed in what he was saying. I think Putin and maybe the people around him, they believe that still in Ukraine, a Russian-speaking person means a pro-Russian person. You know, in Odessa is a Russian-speaking city. Kharkiv, which is under attack now, is a Russian-speaking city. And he thought that the fact that they speak Russian means that they are pro-Russian. And when the Russians attack, they would come out with Russian flags and would greet the liberators. But it totally didn't work out. I just checked the other day. There are some pro-Russian politicians in Kharkiv, for example, the former governor, who was always very pro-Russian and anti-revolution in 2014, you know. But he's defending the city now against the Russian occupiers, how they are called in Ukraine at the moment. So, yeah.
So I think I have a feeling they've obviously miscalculated this, and I mean, I don't know personally why, but there is this feeling that, you know, maybe also because of the pandemic, that Putin has been, you know, quite in isolation, and this political elite has been in isolation. And it seems like they've, the propaganda they've created, or the narrative they've created for their own public, at some point they started believing their own narrative.
The distance from the real world, that absurd table, for example, that we've seen time and again. You know?
Exactly, this gap from what exactly is happening in Ukraine or elsewhere in the world, and how this is portrayed in their heads. So I don't know when was the calculation back there, but it doesn't seem that the calculation was to hold this war for such a long time. It was obviously this blitzkrieg and fast operation and hope that they will be probably greeted with flowers as it's portrayed in Russian TV. So maybe this was the idea in the very Putin's head that didn't really match the reality.
So we have a group in our organization called the Alliance for Securing Democracy, and we monitor Russian disinformation. And some of the narratives that are being put out right now are about Ukraine having chemical and biological weapons, resuscitating its nuclear program, being a vassal state of the United States, right? So these are things that are out there, but in a way, it sort of foreshadows what Russia perhaps intends to do, right? And in that way justifies perhaps future actions of Russia. So I think it's, yes, propaganda for its people, but also in a way, sort of projecting in the mirror what Russia intends to do in Ukraine as well.
It has to be said, in all fairness, that the US has a track record as well. Colin Powell.
I think that was a war that it was not a war that the United States provoked. Sure, there was faulty intelligence, but it wasn't a war of choice, perhaps, to say what Blinken said, because I think that there is a clear difference. It was a different time. This is an unprovoked, unjustified act of aggression on the part of Russia.
But I want to add, as a German who has lots to do with Russians, who was discussing with Russians over the last 20 years, I'm thinking about the Iraq war all the time over the last days. I was demonstrating against the Iraq war in Germany at that moment, but still we couldn't prevent it. And I would say that the harm this war did, we also see it today, because Russia is using something like the Iraq war as a justification to its own people,
because Russia says as a template.
The Americans are also doing this. We can do it too. And I, at this moment, I can't really answer, no, it's not true.
I think there's a clear difference between the United States and Russia in terms of, the United States has caused harm with the Iraq war, no doubt about it, but it still sees itself as a benign power. It still believes in the rule of law. It believes in democratic values. I don't think you can compare the United States with Russia. And the whataboutism that Putin is trying to put out there is exactly what we need to stand up against in order to have resolve in the West against Putin's actions in Ukraine.
But the Iraq war still made the position of the West, or the moral position of especially the US, much weaker.
I think you can all point to, we're changing the topic of this program, but I think you can point to the United States in several occasions over history. But the point is that the United States also has a track record of correcting itself and being a benign power for the liberal international order. That's my belief.
Let's get back to Ukraine. It's very important that we do so. The conflict has prompted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to turn on to his people on what seems like a sort of a daily basis, you'd almost have to say. And it's very dramatic what he has to say, and it's often very strong stuff. Let's listen in.
Today, we must be united in condemning this war crime of Russia, which reflects all the evil that the occupiers have brought to our land, all of the destroyed cities and everything they've done. The bombing of a maternity hospital is conclusive evidence that what is happening is a genocide of Ukrainians.
Natalia, what do you say to that accusation of genocide? That's a very, very, very dour crime. Yeah.
The genocide is used in this space, but it's also used in the Russian propaganda, actually. So it's a very, very serious accusation, and I cannot obviously speak for the Russian government or even for the Russian people there. For me, it's really painful to see what's happening there. And as a Russian, I feel horrible every day talking to my friends in Ukraine about it. But if we see right now, this is also on the informational part, this war between these narratives, as you mentioned at the very beginning, and we also have to see what the Russian side has to say, what the Ukrainian side has to say on this, in the sense that they're trying to build this narrative, and of course the Ukrainian narrative is supported, or what the president is saying is supported by the West, and it seems to be that it's the truth narrative there. But then, in order to win, I think we need to find a way how to fight the propaganda and misinformation that's happening in Russia. This is very crucial, and it's very crucial to be allies of these people who stand up to this as well.
Russia could end up very, very, very isolated indeed at the end of this whole this war. It could take almost a lifetime to recover, to get back to where people were. How disturbing is that for you?
It is very disturbing. The past week, I've been at home. I've been in Moscow that time. I've seen people just sitting, looking at this, not believing, in huge shock of what's happening. And no matter where they stand in this position, that most of people I know, they are against this, and they're in shock of what's happening, and they don't support this. They're just seeing their lives being thrown out of the window. They've seen all their, projects, all their savings, everything just get out. And
it's beyond all belief. It's just not what we expected.
Obviously, and the sanctions will hit really hard, especially these people. People who are open-minded, who are, in their 30s, 40s, who've managed to do something with their lives, and now, one day to another, they just don't have it all. And of course, we hadn't talked about that they're also to blame, and people in Russia are probably also responsible to a large extent to what's happening there. But does it help? Does it help us to fight Putin?
I would add that the crazy thing is that one of Putin's main points of his why people still voted for him after 20 years was the word stability.
Yeah.
That, he said, okay, the 90s were a time of chaos, of poverty, and we rebuilt this country, and I guarantee stability. And now he's throwing all this stability out of the window to wage this war against Ukraine. And this brings me to the point that to think that Putin has somehow lost lost contact with reality. He's thinking in categories of being a historic person, of being some kind of Napoleon with a historic mission, and he doesn't care about things like economy anymore.
Important points, very, very, very important points. Sudha, I'd just like to come back to you because we sort of ganged up on you just a little bit just now. As being an American, I just want to... the Americans are obviously a key player in what's going on in Central Europe at this point in time. It's a long way away, but it isn't for Americans. Can you explain how people are sort of reading the situation for us?
Well, I think for one thing, the Ukrainian people have won the hearts and minds of the United States.
Big time, big time.
Zelenskyy will be speaking to a joint session of the U.S. Congress. And I think that it's made the people in the United States realize that freedom and democracy are not to be taken for granted. So I think that has definitely woken people up about the fragility of democracy. And of course, when you think about the region, it also shows that the United States still plays a major role in keeping the stability of Europe. And I think if it were up to countries in Central and Eastern Europe, they certainly want a strong United States present. And this whole idea of Europe taking its security into its own hands, or this concept of strategic autonomy, is certainly on the back burner for now.
Okay. Moritz, we're running out of time just a little bit, but I did want to come back to you because there was... you wrote an item about what you experienced when you were still recently in Ukraine, and you were quite explicit in it, and just a little bit sort of unjournalistic in that you said it broke your heart. That's how it felt to me. Tell me a little bit more about how it broke your heart.
It actually broke my heart because I'm not only writing about this Eastern European region, about Russia, Ukraine, Armenia, and all these countries over the last 20 years. I have many friends there, I have relatives there, And I somehow saw my mission in explaining Russia to the Germans, explaining Germans to the Russians, and building bridges, actually. And my belief is that, I mean, there are a lot of setbacks, you know, like Putin's getting more authoritarian, everything, and all his campaigns against gay people and so on. But still, I believed in that we were going in the right direction. And of course, this moment when Russia and the Russian army attacks Ukraine, where I also have many friends, it destroys everything. And I think it will take a very long time to
Let me pick up on that, because one of my colleagues said that he could imagine, he said it's a quirky position perhaps to have at this point in time, but we could be out of this in a couple of weeks' time. Is that in any way likely? Or is this a deep war?
We really don't know. I think from what I hear from the, people assessing the military of this operation, it cannot drag for more than a couple of weeks. But then again, nobody expected this to start in the first place. So at this point, I think we can't really say.
We've got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Thanks very much for joining us. I hope we've given you at least food for thought. For now, goodbye and tschüss.